Yeah, I got to make
Okay, so
sure.
yeah, the last time it didn't say that, I guess. Okay. So,
No
okay,
problem. No problem.
it's Alexander Lawrence again with the Portable Infinite. It's we're interview. It's the end of August. We're here with Blake Nelson. He's the author of this book, The City Wants You Alone. It came out in 2015, but the paperback is available now, so go get it. This is one of my favorite books of the year, so check it out. It'll be on my list when I get my list 2023. I'll put it on there, and it's part of a series that started with Girl, Blake Nelson, quite a maybe 95. When was that?
94.
Before, and then Dream School is the second one.
That was 98, I think.
They make sense that there's three books because the girl book is kind of the teenage years, mostly in Portland, and she travels around. And then Dream School, she goes off to the East Coast, and she writes a book called Manifesto. And then the new book is more like after college, and she becomes a writer. She works in publishing, and well, let me introduce Blake. Blake is an American author. He writes adult books. He has over 15 novels. There's young adult books in there. He grew up in Portland, Oregon, and attended Wesleyan and New York University. He's back in Portland, in Hillsboro, Oregon, and he's an expert on all things Portland. So call him up. And his books, Girl, Exile, User, Rockstar Superstar. There's so many. Paranoid Park was made into a film by Gus Van Sant, and the guy that wrote Malinoche just died this week. So that's kind of
That's right. That's right. Walt Curtis.
Walt Curtis. That's the first time I ever heard of Gus Van Sant was Malinoche, and that because I lived in San Francisco, and that was kind of a big book in San Francisco.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
So like I said before, this book kind of is more of a satire of the 90s, of New York publishing, the big advances. I mean, I had, since we were both there in the 90s, I had a limited view because, like, I remember Catherine Texier got that big $250,000 advance for the breakup book. And people got advances 100,000 to 250,000. I guess is a big amount for a writer, because like you're a lot of people come are teaching, or I'm not sure, working at a Italian restaurant. I don't know what they're doing, and then all of a sudden they get this big advance, and it just seems like a jump. And so this book is a satire. Am I right about the next?
Yeah, well, I don't know if I'd call it a satire. It's just funny and realistic, and it's about a girl, from Oregon who moves to New York, and she's very intimidated at first, and well, she's intimidated the whole time. And but she has written a book, and she's been through these music scenes. And I think her experience, her boyfriend when she was in high school, became like an MTV 120 minutes kind of star. So she's not super. So I think she thinks that she can get her book published. And so when she gets to New York, kind of she kind of hustles a little bit and sort of runs around and meets people and tries to figure out how to get an agent. She eventually gets an agent, and the agent she gets is kind of this charismatic guy she's 23 and she's written a first novel. And of course, in New York, they always want a cute 23-year-old girl who's written a first novel. And the novel's, pretty good apparently. And so so she just goes through the whole process. She struggles, then she gets a good agent, then she gets a book deal, then she gets a bunch of money, and she has to kind of go through all these stages that you go through. And like you said, in the 80s and in through the 90s, I think people were still getting big advances. There was still a lot of glamour in the publishing industry. It was much less political and much more flamboyant, and people were real characters, and it was a very interesting and fun scene to be part of. And as you said, I lived in New York in the late 90s, and I kind of got to go through some of that stuff myself. And so, it's just a really fun book to write. And I even feel tempted to tell people that are starting, there's all these new young people right now who are coming up. And I kind of feel tempted to tell them, oh, if you want to know how to get published, read this book. Because really she does it the way you have to do it. If you don't, know if your dad isn't the head of the publishing company, you're going to have to hustle, and you're going to have to, find some way to stand out. But I'm not sure that really it's the same. I don't know if it's the same, and I don't know if it's the same kind of access as there used to be. But
Yeah, well, I think, I mean, there was so in the 90s, there was so many articles about, you know, 40 writers under 30 or something, or these,
yeah, right.
there was a lot more money. I mean, the expansion of borders in America, these big mega bookstores all over the place. I mean, that's how I met a lot of authors like Martin Amis and Bret Easton Ellis, because they would do book tours in the 90s. In the 80s, you would have maybe like read at a college, or maybe a small bookstore, but in LA, we had Beyond Baroque here. Authors went there, but it was very like under the radar. I mean, once you got to the Barnes and Noble and the publishing, I mean, book publishers had advertisements in magazines. There was really big coverage in magazines on book publishing. Now I don't think there would be, in some of the, like in Spin magazine, for instance, they had book coverage, authors in there, and Dennis Cooper and Volman were writing for Spin too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. With the internet, you feel like there is a lot of ways to get the word out of a new book, but it's so dispersed. You don't get that kind of like thing where, at least among the new writers, like people don't come out as big stars like right out of the gate, and with big publicity budgets. And
Yeah,
I think the money's kind of different. A lot of people are on small presses now. I feel like if a book's on a major press, it's got to really sound interesting for me to look at it. And really, I'd rather look at some of these small presses. And a lot of the young people that I find really interesting, they're all on small presses. And so it's kind of a different world now.
yeah, I think, yeah, a lot of, in the last 10 years, I think probably the most interesting books are self-published, and then they kind of get some traction that way. Then they get kind of acquired by the more mainstream publishing and stuff. And yeah, I mean, it was kind of interesting that some of the stars of the 90s, like David Foster Wallace and Elizabeth Wurtzel, are no longer with us anymore. I mean, these were people who did like big book tours. I mean, Wallace, I mean, there were so many articles about this guy, I mean, I don't know. He crushed under the hype, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, that's a tough situation for him.
But there's in your book, in this book right here, The City Wants You Alone. I mean, there's a send. I mean, if it's not satire, it's definitely a send up of the publishing world. And there's an agent who's kind of like this Andrew Wiley character, and then there's this book called Electra Rising by Anna Madsen. It kind of has like an Ayn Rand vibe to it, like just because the name, and maybe like,
Well, that book to me, like that book was more like something like Elizabeth Wurtzel's book, or I don't know. It's more of a sex, drugs, and rock and roll kind of. That's how I imagined it, or like Rich Kids in New York, so that kind of idea.
and
Because then there's always a book like that, at least all through the 80s and 90s. There was several Tam and Janowitz, and then a succession of new sort of it girls of the literary world.
I mean, I think even before Bret Easton Ellis and Tom and Janowitz, I think Fran Lebowitz was a big author in the 70s. She was like a young person. I mean, because she's kind of before our time, but I think in the late 70s, she was sort of like that same kind of person, that came out with a couple books, and she was like 25, and she got a lot of attention and stuff. There's
Yeah, yeah.
there's
She
a
wasn't really sexy though. Like Elizabeth Wurtzel was like sexy. In the character I have in my book, Anna Madsen, she's a real classic. She's like a Cat Marnell type, she's kind of a downtown girl that people probably already know before her book even comes out.
Yeah, Elizabeth Wurtzel had a lot of parties. She was a party girl.
Well, she was kind of the girl, like when I first came back to New York in 97, she was kind of the wild girl of the scene. And then there's, like I say, there's always, every couple of years, there's a new version of that.
And
And that's a big theme of my book, of the book we're talking about today, is that this 23-year-old girl who comes to New York and gets her book published, and it's coming out, and she gets a big advance, and she can tell that she's just going to be the it girl, and she's going to have a 2-year career, and then she's like, and then what am I going to do? And so that's kind of part of the drama. That's kind of part of the exploration of the character in that book.
but she also writes the book Manifesto, which is kind of talked about in this.
Well, in my mind, that was a book that was kind of like the first book you write that maybe isn't really that great. And so I felt like, and nobody would publish that one. So I felt like that was very realistic. Like, you're in college and you write a book, and that's not the best thing you're going to do. And so in this case, in this story, it's the second book that she's able to sell, and is going to, sort of launch her career.
In the 90s also, there was a lot of these magazines like Open City and Paris Review had a lot of parties, and I went to a Granta party, best authors under 40, and Tin House. I was like an editor at Tin House for maybe a couple months around 2000 or something. Did you have any experiences with some of these? There was conjunctions. Did you have some experiences with these magazines and these?
Yeah, sure, sure. I went to a Paris Review party. There's a scene in my book about going to a Paris Review party, and I don't know. I think Jonathan Lethem probably took me to that party, and it was the late '90s, so George Plimpton was kind of older, but it was still a lot of fun. Still, all the young hipster kids were there, and it was, that whole scene was very much still in place at that time.
Well, speaking of Lethem, I mean, when I first met him in at the Book Expo, he only had like one or two books out, and he told me back then that he wanted to have like 40 books and just have this whole section. Are you one of those guys? Or he wanted to be like the little K Dick, where you went to the section, the Barnes and Noble, and there was just a lot of books there, all Lethem. I mean, was that an influence, or are you like that in any
No,
way?
not really. My career has been kind of weird. I ended up writing a lot of young adult books. I had a stretch where I just wrote young adult books. And when you write young adult books, you can fill up a pretty big space, because they publish them, way more frequently than literary authors. So you can have a young, I think I had like one year I had three young adult books come out at once. And so, yeah, I actually have, I don't know, I have like 17 books that might take up a shelf, but that was not my goal. And young adult books are a little bit cheating, even though I loved writing them. They were great fun to write. And I totally enjoyed that part of my career. But yeah, yeah, you don't really think about that. I always just think about the next project, what I'm doing now, like what I'm going to work on tomorrow. So I don't have any ambitions about
And
the amount of words.
well, the original girl was actually I was like a big fan of Sassy magazine back in the early 90s. I tried to write some lame poetry and submit it and try to maybe even under a fake name. And then I just interviewed Ian Savonius a couple months ago.
Oh yeah,
He was
yeah,
like Sassy Boy of the Year or something. And
right.
so girl, not only was it in Sassy, it was like the original cover had, was there Judith Reagan on the cover? Is that right?
Yes, yes, that's
Can you
right.
talk
Well,
about
so
that?
they say. I don't know. That's just a rumor.
Oh, okay,
That's,
that
and
was
for people who don't know, she was the person who acquired the book. I had a lot of trouble getting Girl published, but she was the one who took the chance to do it. And they say that the girl that was the girl on the cover of the book was a picture of her as a teenager. So that was kind of weird. But that shows that she really liked the book. So And she really related to it.
But
And
I think this one's a better cover. I mean,
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, because you tipped me off about Dominic Swain. I went to go see the Lolita film in London when it wasn't out here yet, and then maybe 5 years later, I met she used to hang out in LA and go to clubs, and I saw her at a show, and I got to meet her, and I mentioned that I knew you, and she said, "Oh yeah, I read that book," and I think I still have her phone number around here somewhere.
Well, she was the star of the movie, so I hope she read the book.
But yeah, and but you think that I mean the girl is a good movie, but not such a great adaptation of the novel. It's sort of like it's just more kind of like how movies about grunge were made in that time, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It just wasn't, the producers, the guys who bought the rights and set it all up, they were the guys who had made Buffalo 66, which was a great movie and in one of the classic indie movies, and kind of was the perfect person that producer. He was the perfect guy to do a project like Girl, which had a real edgy underground feel to it, even though it's kind of a classic story. But then what happens with movies is, if the script isn't quite right, or the director is, I think it was a first time director, and so you're kind of at the mercy of circumstance and synchronicity, and it just didn't turn out that great. But even though it wasn't like the greatest movie, it still played on Cinemax. My God, it would every night, 3 o'clock in the morning, Girl at Cinemax. And for years it played on there. And it would be funny because I would, after it had been on, playing constantly at the middle of the night, there'd be girls on review sites saying, "Oh, the movie was better. I tried to read the book and I couldn't read the book or whatever."
Yeah.
So
So yeah, it's more a little bit more like that movie Singles or Bong Water.
yeah, it just wasn't,
Then it was like Buffalo 66. Yeah. So
yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah.
just like movie making. That's how it is. Like just because it's like a collaborative effort, it just ends up being like a lot of other films at the time, and not so much. And so if people want to watch a film adaptation, they should watch Paranoid Park because that's like a better.
Yeah, oh yeah, that's a great one. Yeah, yeah. That's the difference. Is like you get Gus Van Sant, he knows what he wants to do. He's got a very clear idea of what it's gonna look like, and that was fantastic. So, that's not a bad track record to have one sort of not great movie and then have a really good movie by a great director. That's awesome.
So like since I read all these books, I mean this week, are all your novels first person narratives, or you have 17?
No, no, they're all different kinds. I wrote all those YA books, and I could sort of do anything I wanted with those. So some of them are boy first person, sometimes they're third person. Some of them are girls, some of them are. So there's a pistolatory novel, and one of them is kind of like that. So so I've sort of done everything.
I
But I
guess.
think for
Oh,
some reason when I do girls, when I can really like make fun of the whole vernacular of teen speak, those are the ones that people seem to really like.
I watched that movie with Charlize Theron called Young Adult. I just watched it like last night. What did you think of that film? I mean, that's it's based. She's
I don't know why they called that young adult. I mean, I guess I do. I guess I do. I didn't really enjoy that movie. People think it's a good portrayal of a horrible person. I don't really want to see a good portrayal of a horrible person. What did you think? What did you think it
I
was?
think it stands up. I mean, I think
Yeah,
yeah, it might. I mean, she's. I mean, I think. I mean, it's like this kind of flawed character. She just happens to be a young adult writer and stuff. It's kind of sad. She could have been like kind of like a has been indie rocker. She could have been like one of the members of Veruca Salt or something, and
yeah, yeah.
or something. It could. I think that was just sort of and young adult. I mean, I mean, I don't even know what young adult. I mean, there's like is Catcher in the Rye young adult. Like since I
Well, they would sell it as that now, but I mean, I'm not even sure what they would do with that. Maybe they wouldn't publish it because it was offensive in some way. I don't know.
well, what happened to I sold you that beach cruiser like when you lived in Venice for about a year or so. What I sold you that beach. What happened to that bike? Did you give it to?
Oh, yeah, I rode that bike. Well, I lived there for 5 years. I
Oh,
rode
okay,
that bike all over the place. Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
I was just
Venice
wondering.
is great.
And you have the book about Venice Beach there. That was kind of I read that one.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
Okay, so let's. I guess we got way more time than we were like pressed for time last time. Okay. Oh, okay. So in the '90s when we were in New York, I mean, there was all these kind of hip authors and Rick Moody and people. Arthur Nersessian was around. Maggie Estep was kind of.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I mean, you had that latest article was about MTV. I mean, I was kind of thinking of Max Blagg a little bit. Did you have any experience with that guy?
Yes, yes, I remember. I mean, he used to come into this bar I used to work in, and he was a great guy. He was really nice. He was older than me, and I kind of looked up to, he was one of those guys. In New York, there's all these, that's what the great thing of New York City is. There's all these, when you're young, you go there, and there's all these people that are older than you, and or maybe are just one level above where you are, kind of in the, in your artistic life or whatever. So there's always people to look up to and to emulate. And and I lived in that house with Jonathan Lethem, and he did Motherless Brooklyn right about that time. So
Right,
I got to see him like kind of become a big star after being kind of an obscure science fiction guy.
right,
And Colson Whitehead was around, and it was just really fun. And people would, and the lesson you learn when you're in a scene like that is, uh, people kind of blow up, and then they kind of come back to earth, and then another person blows up. And if you're around long enough, like Maggie Estep, when we were little poets, when we would hang around ABC No Rio poetry readings, I became a big star because MTV wanted to make those videos like I talked about in the article.
yeah,
And so for a minute, I was like the guy. Then John Hall did his detachable penis video, and he became a big star. And then a couple of years later, Maggie Estep wrote a big book that did well, and then she became a big star. And so the idea that you're like when you're in a real artistic community, the idea that one person is going to become the star and everybody else is going to get left behind is not really true. Like, everybody kind of has their moment and everybody goes up and down, and it's the arts, and I'm sure it's the same in the music biz. It seems like one band, nobody will ever touch them. They're the greatest thing ever. But then 5 years go by and it's, the whole scene has changed. And so, that's one thing I learned from those years in New York of just being humble and don't get too excited and don't get jealous because you think so and so got something you should have got, because you'll end up getting it at some point. And it's really fun to be. I live in Portland now, and people in Portland, they've never even met a writer, and they don't know what to, they, oh, oh, you're a writer. Oh, have you ever written a book? And well, yeah, I've written a whole bunch of books. And well, anything I've ever heard of. And you go through this thing, and no, people don't know how to,
yeah,
there's no writers. I mean, there are writers here, of course. There's a couple, but it's not like New York where everybody is a
yeah.
writer.
Everybody has their time. I mean, me and Dave Eggers tried out for Real World San Francisco back in,
Oh, no way, no way.
and I felt like I had a call back and he was all jealous and stuff. And then but he was actually on it because like the guy Judd did some cartoons for Cups magazine, and me and Eggers and Dave Moody worked for a bunch of magazines and stuff. And there was like things like that happened all the time. Or you're on the national news, or the papers are coming for some stupid reason. It's like It's
Right.
it's very silly. Well, yeah. Oh, so I was going to talk about. I mean, there was that scene. I mean, the kind of the and the ABC No Rio Poets Cafe and the MTV scene, of course, in the '90s and KGB bar, and but the writers like Brady Sinalis and Leatham, they looked up to were like Don DeLillo, Paul Auster, and Gordon Lish, and who he used to meet. So I did this famous interview with Gordon Lish like in 97, 98, and he was really, I guess he had like a drunken night before he was like out of it, and he kind of like hated the interview and what was gonna like
Sue you or
yeah,
something.
sue me, and but it never happened. I just ignored the letter, and but you had an experience with Lish real in the '80s, like when he was still doing the quarterly, and everybody thought, "Oh, I'll get into the quarterly," and that was like that was like everybody that did
Yeah,
writing.
that was the big thing at that time. You know, you got to get in the quarterly. It was like, oh, geez, that's the greatest. Because he was at Knopf and he was a big editor, and he had discovered Raymond Carver and helped Raymond Carver sort of become a perfect minimalist. You know, he was really the hottest editor in town. And so I was just like everybody else. I was trying to get in there, and I sent him a bunch of stuff, and he would write me these notes back, and was encouraging. But I kind of got the feeling I had no chance if I didn't do something dramatic. So one day he sends me a note, and I can't read it. So I go into. I was living in Brooklyn, so I went into Manhattan. I went to Knopf. I scammed my way through the security and got up into the offices, and then I went to the receptionist and I said, at Knopf, like in the offices, and said, "Oh, I need to see Mr. Lish. He wrote me this note. I can't read it." And so she could tell that I was up to something. And she called Lish on the phone and said, "There's a young man here to see you." And I looked like I was about 12 at the time. And he came out, and I kind of argued with him. I was like, my poems are better than they're as good as the poems you got. You should really consider me, or whatever I said. And he was kind of like, oh, and he was so great because when he came out, he looked like he was dressed in like fly fishing clothes, or like some sort of like Mount Montana, gentlemanly outdoorsman outfit. It was crazy. I think he might have had an ascot, and he just looked great. He just looked like such a character, and I think that's really why I felt like I could just go off on him. And I was dressed, and I had my little weird artsy glasses, and I think I glued my hair back, and I had this old horrible raincoat. And so I was like the kid, the grunge kid or whatever. And so we went at it for a little bit, and then they pushed me into the elevator and got rid of me. And then I thought, oh, I fucked that up. I'll never, I've ruined my career forever. No one will ever take me seriously. But then I sent some more poems in, and he started publishing them. And then he started, encouraging me and promoting me and helping me. And I really became kind of like a project for him, I think. But then he wanted me to get involved in his seminars, or these teaching things he would do, where they'd lock you in a room for a couple of days, and it was all about like making sure you really had the intensity to be a real, that's what he wanted. He wanted intensity and real commitment. But I was already like that. I was already I was very intense.
You're
And
really
so I did. So I declined to get involved in that. And I didn't want to be one of his acolytes. I didn't want to be like a Lish person. And so I really wanted to be on my own. So I kind of, I didn't really continue with him, but he was a great guy, and I just love characters. I love people that dress up, and I was friends with Lauren Saran for a while, who was kind of a publicist. And this is more recent. And she would wear these great clothes, and sort of act out this part of being the glamorous woman in the, she's like 25 and she's like, acting like she's the king of uh, the New York literary publicity scene. And so I love stuff like that. I love like in Tao Lin when he was voted the most annoying author by the Village Voice, and then he no it was it was Time Out, I think, called him the most annoying writer in the Lower East Side, and he covered their door with Britney Spears stickers or something. I've got this. I don't think I got the story right, but I just like people who are charismatic and make a big, make a big scene of some sort.
Well, at least you got some feedback from Lish. I mean, I got like the generic rejection letter, like from the quarterly, I think, like as I remember. I might still have it back here somewhere. So like so you're doing a travelogue website now. Where can people see that at?
Oh, it's blakenelson.substack.com. And it's just travel pieces, and it's kind of and they've sort of turned into memoirs, little memoir pieces. Like I like the most recent one I'm working on now is I was in a band in college, and we did, and it's the piece is about our first time that we went and played at a different college. We drove up to Wellesley and played at their student center, and so it's just this, it's a short article about that trip and what it was like during that time. And each one is like that. It's doing really well, and I've got quite a few subscribers. I'm kind of surprised that first I was just going to do it as travel pieces, like literal travel pieces, but it kind of became a different kind of thing, and it's now like memoirs and personal essays. And in the past I tried to do things like that. I tried to write like personal essays, and I could never like get them. I could never get the flow of it right. But by doing them as travel pieces, they really work, and they're really good, and I'm quite excited about doing it.
So we'll put a link in the description here, and let's get some more subscribers like this week, man. Let's bump it up. Okay, so if people want to buy this book, where do they go? They go to Amazon, or where should?
Yeah, the release date is September 23rd. The best place to go is girlnoise.net, which is the young woman who's publishing the book. Exactly. Yeah. Girlnoise.net. And you can pre-order now. And this woman, she's great. She started a small press. She's published a bunch of the sort of younger, cool people that are coming up now. But she was a big fan of Girl. And when she saw that that last book hadn't been published in paperback, she jumped on it, and she got in touch, and she was like, that book needs to be a real book. And she was right. And so she's doing it, and she's doing a great job.
Are you going to do some?
Lee is her name.
Yeah, Carol Lee, or yeah, uh,
Diane Lee.
Diane Lee. Yeah. Are you gonna do some readings based around this book?
I don't know yet. We'll see. We'll see how it goes.
What's next for Blake Nelson? What can we look forward to like later?
The travel stuff, that's really, I think I've got so many of them I've got a whole bunch of them, and I could definitely put them all to put the best ones and make a little book out of it. So that's a possible thing I could do. But the travel pieces, I do them once a week. They come out on Saturday afternoon. They're usually about an 8 or 9 minute read, and they're about all different things of the culture and a lot of stuff from the 80s, the 90s, and up to now. And I went to Japan, and now I go on trips specifically to do travel pieces. So I was just in Japan in the spring, and it's really fun, and they're great pieces.
Well, definitely check out his books. Blake is one of my favorite writers, and kind of, I mean, yeah, it's like, and I have more Blake Nelson books than any other author, I think, now, nowadays, and
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. I know you've been you've been around forever, and it's always
yeah,
great to see you and talk to you.
Yeah, and yeah, it's like this is definitely going to be one of my books of the year when I make my list. So look for that list. I always look forward to Blake's books, and he's always been a good friend, and he's been very productive. I mean, there's 17 books in 25 years, and when I interviewed him for Exile, that's like his second book. But
Yeah, that was a long time ago.
and it's pretty exciting to see he's still putting it out and still doing it. And everyone should check him out. Everybody, all you people, we'll keep this on YouTube for forever. And we everyone should love Blake Nelson. He's an interesting guy, interesting writer. And if he's doing some Substack, it's probably worth checking out. Okay, well, thanks for talking to me today, Blake.
All right, thanks so
Let's
much.
let's stop. Wait a minute, how do you look? Let's see.